Hey guys, lepedaler back with another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at disc brakes versus rim brakes in 2020 and see if my opinion has changed since the last time I made a video on this exact topic. So without further ado, let's get right into this video. So the last time I made a video on this exact topic, it was very well received and a lot of viewers saw that the video was very well balanced in terms of opinions, and I addressed both the advantages and disadvantages between disc brakes and rim brakes and overall gave my opinion. But with a year of riding experience that I've gained since the last time I made that video, my opinion has slightly changed with a little bit more reasoning, and I'm still going to be very unbiased in this debate between rim versus disc. So I'm going to give you guys an updated critique of both disc brakes versus rim brakes in 2020, and at the end I'll give you guys my overall thoughts on which bike you should potentially buy for your next bike this upcoming 2020 season. The first criteria we're going to talk about is weight. The typical disc brake bike weighs about half a kilo or 1 pound heavier than its rim brake counterpart. So the average rider or consumer that's using cycling as a sports hobby or just doing it for recreational purposes shouldn't be focused on how much their bike actually weighs. That only really matters if you're racing and every second matters, and the deciding factor for overall performance isn't the weight of the bike rather than the overall fitness of the rider and their abilities on the bike. Disc brake bikes are only going to get lighter as time progresses and technology improves, so in a couple years it's going to be a lot more fair to compare both between weights because rim brake bikes have been around for so long, so technology has obviously improved to the point where they've reduced the weight very significantly versus disc brakes that have only been out on road for a couple of years, and technology is going to only improve and reduce the overall weight. The Tour de France has still been won on a rim brake bike and not a disc brake bike, which shows you how important it is for pro riders to save weight on their bikes when going through a mountainous stage type race. Now the price difference between your average disc brake bike compared to your average rim brake bike is about $300 to $500 more expensive on the disc brake bike. And the reason why is very simple. Disc brake bikes are newer technology, which will require a higher price compared to rim brakes, which the technology has already been here for multiple years. The last criteria I talked about in my last video comparing disc brakes and rim brakes was maintenance. And they do have their advantages and differences between both systems. However, they are at the same playing field if you do plan on bringing it to a bike shop to get serviced. And that's very simple. I'm going to explain why. Overall maintenance on a rim brake bike is very simple if you do learn how to do it because it's only changing cables and housing and it's not that complicated, where compared to a disc brake bike where you're going to have to bleed and have liquid involved and have to clear air bubbles and it's a closed system. That gets a little bit more complicated, especially if you're not a very hands-on person that's used to dealing with more maintenance, industrial type stuff. Now I'm not trying to say you're doing something intense, super like brain surgery or anything along those lines, but it does get a little bit more complicated because it's not as straightforward as pulling a cable. Now that still requires skill, don't get me wrong. Changing brake cables and housing on a rim brake bike is equally challenging, but it's a little bit easier in my opinion and my experience than dealing with a disc brake bike. But the nicest thing is that both bikes, disc brake or rim brake bike, can be brought to your local bike shop, and they don't really have different price ranges between both systems. Now I think it's very slight for certain things, but on average it shouldn't be that much more expensive. Bleeding, I know, is more expensive because obviously that can be a lot more time consuming because rather than pulling a cable, you're gonna have to bleed a system, and sometimes if you don't get all the air bubbles out the first time you bleed brakes, you might have to do it again. So in that situation it can be a little bit more pricey, but let's say in terms of the ability to get it maintenance done on it, you really won't be concerned because you're going to be bringing it to a bike shop to get it done, so it'll get taken care of. However, it should be noted, depending on what bike shop you have and if there's a discrepancy between both maintenance fees, disc brakes might be a little bit more expensive because it is a little bit more time consuming when compared to a rim brake bike getting maintenance done on it, so that should be noted. So those were the three big criteria I talked about in my last video, and now we're going to get a little bit more in depth of other criteria that I forgot to mention and things that I've learned since making that video. So let's get right into that. So the new criteria that I like to add to this comparison video between disc and rim brakes is going to be one of tire clearance and what type of tires can actually be run on each system. Now for disc brakes, the norm is to come with a 28mm, and for rim, the norm is to come with a 25mm. Now, if you're lucky, sometimes a rim brake bike might accept a 28mm, but that's lucky because a lot of the times there is going to be rubbing. So a 25mm tire is typically used on a rim brake bike, where on a disc brake bike, because there is a wider tire clearance, It usually comes stock with 28 millimeters. However, you can easily put a 32 millimeter, 38 millimeter, and sometimes up to a 42 millimeter type tire on the bike. The wider the tire increases overall comfort because there's a larger contact area versus the tire and the road. So on disc brake bikes, since you're allowed to run 32 millimeters, 38 millimeters, and upwards to 42 millimeters, where on a rim brake bike, you're most likely going to be pushing it at 28 millimeters if you get lucky and your dropouts on the rear allow that size. Disc brake bike, for that reason, is a lot more comfortable because I myself do enjoy a wider tire, and that's usually because if I'm not looking for every second and I'm just looking for exploring and just more casual riding and more gravel riding or just more all-purpose riding, let's not even say one discipline, because I'm not going to disagree on road specifically. If you have no ambition to maybe go on a little rough path or maybe a little rough road, a 25 millimeter is probably going to be the fastest tire, and that's been scientifically proven up to now. But for overall riding, I'm not gonna lie and say that a wider tire is not more comfortable. So for that reason, I feel for overall comfort, since you're allowed to run a wider tire with disc brakes because there's a bigger tire clearance, I'm gonna have to give overall comfort to disc brakes. However, if you are more comfortable and you'd rather just stick to road, rim brakes are perfectly fine because 25 millimeters is still comfortable. But if I have to give one the edge, the fact that you can run wider tires if you so choose to, not only allows for more comfort, but allows for more versatility, which we're gonna get into the next criteria. The next criteria we're gonna get into is versatility, and disc brakes win on this one compared to rim brakes. And that's simply because of a wider tire clearance. The fact that you can run a little more aggressive tires that are bigger in size, not only, like I said in the previous criteria, is gonna be an improvement for overall comfort, but that will allow you to do a little bit off-road. So I'm not saying this is gonna be fully become a dedicated gravel bike, because obviously if you're using a disc brake bike that's designed for road, it's gonna flourish in road biking conditions. So it's not gonna be, very similar to how a gravel bike would operate and perform. But the fact that you have that versatility where it can be slightly a gravel bike, if you put wider tires that are a little bit more aggressive, that's so nice to have that feature. Now, I'm not saying you're gonna be super aggressive and it's gonna become your gravel bike, but you have that option where, if you're riding, you're doing some exploration riding or just casual riding and you see a little bit of a rough terrain, a rough road that you wanna check out, maybe a single track that's not too aggressive, it doesn't have like tree stumps and a lot of dirt. If you have a wider tire, for example, a 28, or I would say 38 or even a 32, I would say 32 to 38. The fact that you can ride on that comfortably and, explore, where on a road bike that's a rim brake, since you're most likely going to have a 25 millimeter tire, you won't really want to, divert from the road. So I would have to give versatility to disc brakes because of the wider tire clearance, which enables you to run a wider tire and a little bit more versatility in that aspect. So the next criteria we're going to be talking about is handling, and neither one has an edge on one another. The reason why is because it's very case-by-case situation and depends on what the rider determines is best for them. So for myself, I've been always riding a rim brake bike for the majority of my cycling career, and anytime I've gotten on a road bike that's actually disc brake, I found it pretty sluggish. However, I think that's somewhat biased because I've never actually had a disc brake road bike in specific longer than a month, 2 months to actually get a true feeling and then go back to my rim brake bike and compare. The only time I've had a disc brake bike for a long period of time was my cyclocross bike or my gravel bikes, and that's only been on certain type of terrain. Yes, I've been on the road, but I never treated it as a dedicated road bike. It was more of my adventure bike where I would go on single track, road, trails, everything. So it was never a fair one-to-one comparison. So for that reason, I can't give either disc brakes or road bike an advantage for handling, because I feel like that's very subjective and you really have to get a feel between both systems to give a fair, unbiased opinion. Now, this is probably the most important criteria that you guys want to know from this comparison video, and that's which one actually performs better. Now, there isn't a simple answer, but I'll give you guys a quick rundown. I would say for beginners that don't have a lot of experience braking and a lot of biking experience, a disc brake bike is going to offer a lot more modulation and is going to allow you to brake later than sooner. So what that means is that if you're going around a corner very fast, on a rim brake bike, you would actually have to, pre-slow down before you going into that corner, where on a disc brake bike, you can brake later in a corner. Now, is that to say you brake in the corner? No, because that's obviously dangerous. But on a rim brake bike, you would have to brake a lot sooner, where in a disc brake bike, you can brake a little bit later, which is nice because as a beginner, you're not very skilled, and therefore there's more likelihood that mistakes may take place. So having that little cushion to brake later is gonna reduce the chances of hurting yourself or not being able to stop. So for that reason, for performance as a beginner, I would have to give it to disc brakes, because not only is there better braking on average as a beginner, but you can also ride more confidently in downhill situations, and you can also ride better in rain. So that's something that's super important, is that in the wet, disc brakes will outperform rim brakes any day of the week, and I totally support that. Now, I myself, like I said, have been using a rim brake bike for the majority of my cycling career, and I'll never forget this one situation when I was going downhill and I feathered my rim brakes. I have to think about this because this was crazy. I feathered my rim brakes and there was no grip. And that really scared me, because I literally had no way of stopping. So in that situation, it was somewhat scary to think, damn, my brakes have no traction. I can't feather my brakes at all. So in that situation, disc brakes probably would have served a lot better. So on the contrary, what I would like to say is that, let's say you push descending and you push rainy conditions aside, right? Let's just say for pure performance on braking. Now, for rim brakes, as long as you're somewhat experienced and you understand, how to brake and, how to feather your brakes, and you're not hard braking or anything like that, you have some, good practice braking, I think either system is adequate. I feel like rim brakes are just as adequate. Like I say, I like to stress is that, in the Tour de France professionals, and I know we're not all professionals or all racing, but the key of a good cyclist is when you don't really have to use your brakes that often, especially if you're on road, you shouldn't be on your brakes that often. I do understand that there's cars and there's situations that, obviously you need brakes, but at the same time, a good rider doesn't need to be on their brakes heavy. So for that reason, if in the Tour they're descending 100 kilometers an hour, very high speeds, and they're still using rim brakes, it's perfectly fine. But what I like to add though is that for the average rider or someone that might not be as skilled, having disc brakes give you a little bit more confidence and more comfort if it is in a rainy situation, or just the fact that you can brake later. That's very nice, and a little bit more less stressful to think about that, oh my god, I have to be really focused on braking, right? So for that reason, I would have to give overall performance to disc brakes, because the fact that you can modulate a little bit easier. I know I said that a lot in my previous video, but it's very important because a lot of people forget that disc brakes do allow braking later on, where rim brake, you have to pre-brake a lot of the times, where disc brake, you can brake later on, right? Like I said, not in the corners, that's obviously dangerous, but if you do make a mistake and you don't brake as soon as you should, you can still, there's a little bit more forgiveness to that. So just a quick summary, if it's in the wet, I would have to give it to disc brake bikes. Obviously, that's the superior braking system compared to rim brakes. However, if it's a rider that's experienced in braking, just on normal conditions, nothing like crazy descents, either system is going to be adequately fine. So I would have to give it a tie for there. It's really what you're more comfortable with and which one you enjoy more. And for that reason, for the type of riding that I do, I choose rim, because I have rolling hills where I am. I don't ride in the wet. I don't do a lot of crazy descents, so I'm more than fine on a rim brake bike. However, if I started traveling to somewhere that's more mountainous or experiences rain, I'd probably pick up a disc brake bike just for overall, ease of mind, comfort, confidence, just that I don't really have to worry about, messing up. If, I brake a little bit too late, I'll have a little bit more forgiveness. So for that reason, I would give overall, and on top of that, for beginners also, I would have to give it to disc brake bikes. So another criteria that's often overlooked is traveling, and I would have to give that to rim brakes. The fact that you don't really have to worry about putting a stopper in between the brake calipers to stop the pistons from getting contaminated or falling out is really nice. The fact that you might not have to bleed your brakes, it's just a cable that you really don't have to worry about. That's another thing that's reassuring, because I can assure you, if you're going somewhere that's not very convenient to go to a bike shop, it's pretty remote to get to a local bike shop, and you'd have to be lucky enough to get your your brakes bled on time, because some bike shops, on average their turnaround time is around a week. So imagine you have a 2-week vacation somewhere, you have a disc brake bike that you travel with, for whatever reason, the brakes need to be bled upon arrival, and you bring it to the local bike shop located. That's a hassle, because then you have to get a car, you have to rent a car, or take take some type of taxi service to the bike shop, and then they tell you worst case scenario, you have to leave the bike here for seven days because we're all booked up. Like that's terrible. Half your vacation right there is put on pause because you don't have the tools to bleed your brakes, right? And I don't even know if you're like how much liquid you're allowed to, if you could bring a bleeding kit, which at that point is oh my God, because I don't think you guys want to worry about, you know, possible liquids leaking and all that stuff. So, you know, in that situation, it's a little bit more of a headache, where on a rim brake bike, it's just a cable. You really don't have to worry about anything like that. So I would have to give traveling for simplicity, I would have to give it to rim brake bikes. However, you know, disc brake bikes, as long as you're okay with potentially having to get it rebled, worst case scenario, it's not the end of the world. But on simplicity, I give it to rim brakes. So one advantage that disc brakes have over rim brake bikes is that the fact that a disc brake wheel set can actually last a lot longer, especially if it's high end, because the only thing you're replacing is the rotor, and you're not replacing the braking surface like you are in a rim brake bike. So for that reason, just for, you know, wheel sets alone, a disc brake bike is a little bit better, because if you do invest in a nice light wheel set, you can actually keep it a lot longer, just switch the rotors. Where on a rim brake bike, as soon as that high-end braking surface on the wheel set is done, then it's time to replace it. So that's the criteria that you guys should be looking for when comparing disc brake bikes and rim brake bikes. And now I'll give you guys my opinion on which one I would choose and why each one still has their reasons to be purchased in 2020. The reason why a rim brake bike could be bought in 2020 and still be used is as follows, and is why I primarily went with choosing a rim brake bike for myself. So the reason why I think a rim brake bike is still, you know, good to have in 2020 is because it's easy to maintenance. You know, if you want to be someone that is learning to be more hands-on and have a better connection with your bike and maintenance stuff by yourself rather than taking it to your local bike shop all the time and, you know, saving some money, then doing maintenance on your bike on a rim brake bike is very easy. You don't have to buy a lot of equipment that's expensive, like a bleeding kit. So for that reason, you know, maintenance is, you know, very simple to learn, and there's a lot of great videos online that can teach you how to do maintenance on a rim brake bike. Now, on top of that, like I said in the video, rim brake bikes typically are lighter. So if you're someone that does a lot of climbing where every gram matters to you, a rim brake bike is going to be a lot less, you know, weight wise. So that's great for that if you're very, you know, picky on weight and you care about saving weight on climbs. Now, also, it should be noted that there's a better price on rim brake bikes. Now, like I said, the difference in discrepancy is around $300 to $500 between models that are the exact same. So if you're someone that doesn't really need a disc brake bike because you're pretty confident with your cornering and you're descending and you don't really ride in the rain and you want a lightweight bike, then saving $300, $400 and maybe getting a power meter or a better wheel set is something that can actually be considered to be very good for you. So that's one thing to remember, is that price could be a deciding factor, especially if you're trying to save and, you know, you don't have a lot of funds. That's something that should be considered. Now, like I said, if you do a lot of traveling, a rim brake bike is going to be a lot less headache and a lot easier to travel with, because you don't have to worry about bleeding it or taking it to a bike shop. And lastly, a rim brake bike, if you do have a lot of friends or a lot of other cyclists that you know that are getting rid of rim brake equipment because they themselves have upgraded for whatever reason, they've decided why they want to go with disc, then you can probably snag some really good deals on rim brake stuff. So if your type of riding actually aligns with what a rim brake bike still offers you, then you can get a lot of good deals. And for that reason, you could save a lot of money and still have a very enjoyable type of riding. So the advantages of a disc brake bike, I'm gonna have to start with comfort. The fact that you can run wider tires is gonna allow you to maybe do some gravel stuff or a little bit more single track. I'm not saying anything intense, but the fact that you can go on some nice trails that are very well maintained is something that you can't do with a rim brake bike, and something that makes a disc brake bike a lot more versatile. The fact that braking is improved, especially in the wet or descending or in cornering, for someone that's a beginner or maybe even an intermediate level, you know, that's very nice to have that reassurance, and will probably, you know, make you a lot more confident in stuff where you'd be a little bit less more confident. And, you know, more confidence means more safety, which means more people that are going to be willing to ride, rather than, you know, feel scared that their braking performance isn't adequate enough to go on some, you know, steep stuff. So I feel like that's very good. The other advantage of a disc brake bike is maintenance, and that's because if you do get maintenance done in it, when compared to, you know, say replacing a rim brake cable, it's going to take a lot more frequent times to replace a cable rather than bleeding your brakes once on a disc brake bike. Now that depends obviously on how hard you are on brakes and how much you ride, but on average what I've seen is that people that get maintenance done on their disc brake bike come in less frequently when compared compared to someone that rides a road bike that's a rim brake. So that's something that should be noted. So just like in my previous video, I will give a clear winner. However, I just want you guys to remember that it really depends on what type of riding you're doing. So myself, I got a 2020 rim brake bike because I do a lot of road races, criteriums, and bunch rides where, you know, the pace is fast, it's all road focused. So a rim brake bike made sense. It was lightweight, it was a lot cheaper, $400, which allowed me to get a power meter. So for me, it made sense to go with a rim brake bike. And I do have a dedicated gravel bike, so I didn't really need a dual purpose. Now, one thing that should be noted is that, you know, in the near future, I really feel that, you know, I might actually consider a disc brake bike because I might start traveling and I don't want to have two bikes. I don't want a dedicated gravel bike and I don't want a dedicated road bike. It'd be nice to have, like, you know, a hybrid version between both and just maybe have a different wheel set to swap, or just use different tires and swap between both, where I can do some gravel, I can do some roads. And that's why I'm going to go into saying disc brake is probably the best bike right now. And that's simply just versatility. So I think it's more important to be versatile than to be solely focused on one discipline, because other than racing, a rim brake bike really doesn't make sense for the average rider, because if the average rider can get a disc brake bike that allows them to go on some nice single track, some nice paved trails, or even some just, you know, nice maintained trails, and not really have to be confined to just using the road, that's just going to encourage people to ride more, because, you know, if they don't like cars, they can go on some nice, you know, back roads that are more gravel type-ish. I'm not saying anything intense, and all it would take is maybe a two wheel sets, one for road, one for, you know, gravel, or just, you know, maybe deciding on a hybrid tire that can do both. So a rim brake bike can't do that. So for that reason, I'm gonna have to give it to disc, because that's a no-brainer. Something that allows more versatility is something that should be totally, you know, pushed, and something that should totally be advertised for all type of riders, because a lot of people don't like cars because cars are dangerous. So if you don't want to be on the road, having something that lets you go on the road and then go on a trail and vice versa is something that I totally support and I totally back. So guys, that pretty much wraps it up. I'm saying disc 2020 all the way. I know it sounds somewhat weird because I myself have a rim brake bike as my main road bike. However, I do have a disc gravel bike, so, you know, it really depends on what type of riding. Like I said, I'm racing, a lot of people are beginners, so I would say overall, if you're looking for a new bike, you're not really racing and care about weight, and price isn't really an issue, go with disc, because not only will allow you to ride all type of terrain such as gravel and some single track, obviously well-maintained single track, it'll be more versatile and you'll just love riding it. And you'll have the confidence of better braking in the wet, or just overall if you're not very, you know, well practiced and well experienced in braking. So with that being said, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. Smash the like button, it really helps the channel. Please subscribe and drop a like or drop a comment of why you chose rim or why you chose disc, and I'd love to hear it. It's an ongoing topic that I love to talk about, but I feel like this time around this video is a lot more well balanced, because disc brake has its place as, I would say, the main bike that should be used as a beginner or even intermediate. And the rim brake bike is, I would say, now getting to, you know, very, very niche of, you know, climbing and for racing in specific. So that was the video, guys. I hope you guys did enjoy it. And until the next one, keep on pedaling.